It's the week ending Saturday the 10th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen an unprecedented turnout in recent times for the US midterm elections, the British Army welcoming non-UK recruits, and the 10th birthday of Bitcoin. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Rebecca Gillie, Arion McNicoll and Kari Wilkin. And starting the show this week is Rebecca. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is Lebanon heading for an Arab winter?
If I had a chance to travel anywhere that respects my degree, respects me as a human being, respects my major, and has chances, has jobs, has future, definitely I would go.
That was 23-year-old Mohammed Issa, an engineer, speaking to Al Jazeera's Zaina Kador. So, Rebecca, Lebanon, sounds like he's looking for opportunities outside of Lebanon. What's going on there?
So the thing that's happened this week is that Lebanon's central bank has called on its political representatives to form a government or else risk Lebanon falling into a massive hole of debt. So for context, the last elections in Lebanon were in May, but still no government has been formed. And at the same time, Lebanon has a mounting debt crisis. Its public debt is now worth 152% of its GDP, which makes it one of the most indebted countries in the world. And obviously not having a government is not improving that situation.
Does it put us, and by us I mean the West, I suppose, in a difficult position to preach about this, though, bearing in mind, Northern Ireland not having a government, all of our governments being in debt?
Yeah, unfortunately, Lebanon doesn't have any home rule that could take over. At the moment, the stability is relying largely on stimulus packages from the Lebanon Central Bank, which obviously is not a very sustainable way of keeping the economy afloat. There's a jobs crisis. The real estate sector, which represents a large part of Lebanon's economy, is completely stagnant. Foreign investors are very put off both by the fact that Lebanon doesn't have a government at the moment and also because of its proximity to Syria and the unrest there. And another massive burden for Lebanon among all of this is that it's supporting 1.5 million Syrian refugees.
Arion, is Rebecca right to flag this up as one to watch?
Definitely. As to whether the economy is necessarily going to collapse or not, we're not sure of that yet. I think that sort of remains to be seen. It could well happen. Debt of 152%, to put that in context, when Greece suffered its massive financial crisis, its debt was at 130% of GDP. So, I mean, it's the circumstances look as though it could head in that direction. But I think that there's analysts who say it may emerge and others who say it won't. But either way, the dire straits that the country is in politically are being reflected economically. And I think that that's something to watch, certainly.
And Kari, do you think the solution to this can come from within Lebanon?
I think at this stage in events, it's so far, it's the world's it's got the world's third largest public debt. So clearly, it's really at the bottom. It's really in trouble. So I think it is going to need help from abroad. In April, international donors pledged 11 billion in investment because certainly Lebanon in particular wants to go invest in areas such as IT because it's falling behind in that race. But the investors wanted evidence of economic reforms first to stop public sector waste, fight corruption, revive falling economic indicators. And obviously that's going to require a huge turnaround. And it's another big stumbling block towards recovery.
And so, Rebecca, is there any obvious contender internationally that might wade in and help?
Well, the thing is with Lebanon is everything ties into its quite complicated government structure. I mean,
yes, talk us through the Muslim factions, please, in as much detail as possible in 1 minute.
Yeah, I won't go into the blow by blow, but basically Lebanon has quite a unique and complicated power sharing arrangement where the president of the country has to be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of the house has to be a Shia Muslim. So it's all very carefully balanced.
Okay, but I mean, who is more likely to support them? Are we talking about the Emirate states or are we talking about Iran?
Well, Saudi Arabia has a weird and complicated relationship with Lebanon where they were semi-accused of kidnapping the prime minister, who then emerged sort of saying, ha, I wasn't kidnapped, everything's fine.
Yes, I remember that one.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia is competing for influence, as is Iran, and Hezbollah originated in Lebanon and is both a political and military force in Lebanon. And while I think it's seen rightly as an arm of Tehran around the world, inside Lebanon, Hezbollah has a more complicated status. It's the main party in a coalition of parties which include Sunni Muslim parties, secular parties, Christian parties, and that's actually the main stumbling block now to forming a government, is that Hezbollah actually wants to have more Sunni MPs in the cabinet, which is something that the Sunni prime minister is refusing to do. So you see how it all gets very complicated, and yet, as you were saying, it ties back to the competition between the Sunni Gulf states and Shiite Iran for control of Lebanon.
Arion.
I mean, I just think that it's a bit astonishing that Lebanon is a beacon of stability in the region, given how much it's buffeted by these external forces that Rebecca's just mentioned. You know, the way that Lebanon's internal politics are affected by particularly Iran and Saudi Arabia, but definitely the other neighbours and interested parties who have their own sort of motivations when it comes to what they're trying to do within Lebanon. You'd almost feel as though a crash of a financial kind would have been on the cards years ago, particularly given the effects of Syria. Not only are you, of the Syrian civil war that is, not only do you have the impact of that 1.5 million refugees who have ended up in the country, but Syria was also a major trading partner of Lebanon. So they've also lost all of this revenue from trading with one of their near allies.
And do you think we'll see a brain drain as well? Because like in Rebecca's clip, you know, you're hearing there from someone who's an educated engineer and saying basically can't find a job there. Lebanon has, it seems to me, from the outside, compared to its neighbours, the comparison with Greece is justified in a way, had quite a large number of graduates and professionals and entrepreneurs who presumably would like to stay in Lebanon but now can't.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's been a very dire outlook for educated people hoping to further their careers in Lebanon for a long time. Political rivalry has led to years of governmental paralysis. This isn't a recent thing. Between 2005 until last year, it didn't produce a state budget. So obviously, this leaves businesses in a frozen state. And it's until now Lebanon has typically relied on quite traditional industries, you know, like agriculture, that sort of thing. It does want to go into areas such as IT. There's plans to start gas exploration by the end of 2009. So there is all this promise. But unless this stalemate, this political stalemate that is preventing economic recovery is turned around, people are going to leave. Of course they are.
And I think one of the other problems for the country is that the economy really relies on expats sending money back to Lebanon. And if the country's debt continues to go in the direction that it's heading, then it's only going to discourage people from continuing to send money back to their home. And so, you know, it's just going to ramp up the problem.
And also, presumably, Rebecca, another problem looking at Lebanon from the West, from the EU, from the USA, is Israel. They'll want to make sure that Lebanon doesn't become as much of a basket case as Syria, because that affects the security of Israel. But at the same time, if you're a friend of Israel politically, you don't want to be propping up Hezbollah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons that Hezbollah has the status it does in Lebanon, where it does have a kind of broad cross-sect support, is that it was the force that fought against the Israeli occupation in 2006. So it was able to draw on Sunnis and Christians as well as its, you know, traditional Shiite base. Yeah, I think, you know, for Israel, it will be much the same for the other regional powers. I think their priority will be stability, whether that comes in the form of a Hezbollah-dominated government in Lebanon or not.
Absolutely agree, and I think that the problem for Israel in particular is that it has, you know, instability now potentially all around it. It's got, you know, Syria on one side of its border, Egypt in the south, and then for Lebanon to be in a state where it's approaching a sort of instability of its own, not to mention Jordan being in its own financial dire straits. I think that there is a real prospect for violence, and where that violence may occur is Israel.
Kari, you're next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
I think it's the week we ask, what's the score with customer service?
A single 22-year-old man with a high school diploma who shops rarely and returns often, labeled as not worth the time to market to, and companies don't need to be in a hurry to answer his messages. On the other end of the spectrum, a 41-year-old married woman with a grad degree who shops regularly and often pays full price for items. She's labeled as a preferred customer who should be sent VIP invites and have her complaints answered first.
That was a report from Fox 5's Lauren DeMarco. Kari, CLV, what is that an acronym for?
That stands for Customer Lifetime Value. These are basically scores that get put onto customers to assess their value to the business. This isn't a new thing. It's until recently, these scores were mainly just used within marketing departments. But a recent Wall Street Journal investigation found that companies, including airlines, car dealers, wireless carriers, banks, credit card firms, so all the kind of companies that everyone will come into contact with and be a customer of, are assigning secret scores to customers, CLVs, which determines how good the prices they pay, the service they get, the deals they get offered. You know, if on an airline, it can be the difference between getting an upgrade, a free upgrade to a seat. So
okay, my curiosity is aroused, so well done. But kind of I'm thinking, so what? Why is this your story of the week?
Because it's only just emerging that this is happening, and it's a new use of data, you know, and obviously consumer data is very much in the news, and this is a new way that it's being used. And yes, you could sort of say, okay, so they're doing this, so what? But each firm has their own method of doing this. So there's no way of knowing how they're assessing you. There's no way of knowing what your score is. You've got no right to see that. So you could be labelled, you know, a fraud, a cheapskate, and you don't know this, but it's going to affect all of your consumer experiences, which is a huge effect on your life. And there's no government agency overlooking this. So, in fact, it is a form of prejudice against consumers that we have no control over.
I do wonder whether, Rebecca, this could fall prey to discrimination, anti-discrimination laws, because it's quite likely, isn't it, that if you're weighing people up socioeconomically, you're going to have inadvertent racist results, for example, or ageist results.
You know, I think we kind of got the seeds of that in the clip as well, where they're talking about, you know, a young man versus a married older woman, you know, and of course those are the kinds of judgments that companies do make about their customers, you know, all the time. But there is then that grey area between things that you have control over, like for instance, if you make, you know, high cost purchases, you can see how that's legitimately a way that the company might say, well, let's market more to them, you know. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, you see that they also use details like people's postcodes or, you know, zip codes in the US to determine what kind of value they're going to give to them. And then you see we are creeping closer to that zone of taking these demographic details. And as Kari was saying, with no oversight, it's quite difficult to say, well, who's to say that in private these companies aren't, you know, saying, you know, they're probably using euphemisms, but if they're saying young men in this neighborhood are not worth marketing to, and you look at that demographic data and they all belong to, you know, Latino or black community, then you can see how easily this could be used for prejudice.
But, Arion, before everyone gets up in arms about this, if you are what you in the publishing industry call ABC1, basically relatively affluent, educated, actually you're not going to necessarily do that well out of this widespread implementation of CLVs, it seems, because, yes, you might get better customer service, but you're not going to get offered a discount because they think, well, you can afford to pay this.
Yeah, and actually one of the interesting things that came out in some of the reporting on this was that there's a whole lot of things that they're watching. And one of the things that they're looking for is how much people complain about the service that they're getting or the experience that they've had or their product. You can almost feel some sympathy in certain ways that consumers interact with companies, that the company might want to find a way of mediating the complaints that they're getting back and responding to the ones that they think are legitimate and serious, and being slightly more dismissive about the ones that they don't think are so interesting. I definitely think that it's problematic because it sounds like it's heading towards something discriminatory, but at the same time, there are jerks out in the world, and some of them are probably being jerks back to companies, you know.
Another factor, there was recently a consultancy firm called Eco Consultancy, which looked at how companies are determining these scores and found that actually the indications are that at least half of them, the scores they're coming to are completely inaccurate. So in fact, it's also bad for the companies. So you could say this person is you know, not a worthwhile customer, as it were, but in fact, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you offer bad service to someone who is determined to be a pain, then obviously they're going to continue to be a pain. You offer good service to someone you already have a good relationship with, and they will keep coming back to you, even if they have to pay a bit more for your service, because they know they're going to get decent, they're going to get treated well. So in fact, it just cements existing relationships, whereas in fact, and puts the focus perhaps on too small a group of customers at the expense of everyone else, and potentially at the expense of the businesses themselves.
And to your point earlier, Olly, I think that you're absolutely right. Richer people may be being squeezed by companies who know that they've got more money to spend, and so they're going to try to get more money out of you by offering you the more expensive products at no kind of a discount. So yeah, it can be detrimental to end up in one of those higher assessed brackets.
And to channel Jamie Timpson when he's not in the room, how much uncomfortability, Rebecca, do you think there is around people's data being sold, used, accessed in this way in the general public?
I personally find something quite dystopian and unsettling about this, just kind of in an ethical sense. It kind of reminds me, it's a bit like, it's that Truman Show thing of like your experience is being catered specifically to you. So you could be being offered a price for something, the person next to you is being offered a different price. You could call customer service and wait on hold for an hour, and the person next to you could call and be put straight through. You're getting these dual experiences, and it's almost like an offline version of, I don't know if you remember a few years back, there was a lot of furore about the bubble, this idea that we were being given these curated experiences online because the companies had so much data about us, they were able to present different adverts or promote different articles that would support your political opinion, so they'd appear in your Facebook feed, and basically giving you this bubble experience while everyone else was in their own separate bubble. And it's sort of like that's because of the the widespread use of data now, in every facet of our lives. It's almost like that kind of individual curated experience is creeping offline as well.
Okay, so that's a concern some people have. But what I asked you is, how much discomfort do you think the general public have? Because this actually is what Uber have been doing for years, isn't it? And people quite like saying, "Oh, look at my score on Uber."
It's transparent. You can see your score. You can challenge it. You can ask for an explanation. You've got a different score with each. It's like having a number shining over your head with each company, and you have no idea what that is.
Okay, but do you think the public care?
I just think it's a really useful retort to all of those people who say, look, I don't care if people are watching my email and I don't have anything to hide, and it doesn't really bother me if I'm being surveilled in XYZ way, because actually here is a real world way that people are being penalised based on the way that they're interacting with the world and what their credit scores are and so on. So,
or rewarded.
Or rewarded, actually, yeah. But I think that you're right, that people probably don't have their eyes on this in the way that they probably could.
And also, I think going back to just sort of the more ethical, the more perhaps naive take on it, it's like if I'm giving you my money, I'm giving you my money to get a service. Surely that is enough. Whereas, the people who actually, there was a Peter Fader, he's a marketing professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was one of the leading proponents of these CLV scores and helped popularize it. And incidentally, he's just sold his data analytics firm, Zodiac, to Nike for an undisclosed sum. So clearly, big multinational firms like Nike are taking this very seriously. But the whole ideal behind it is that not all customers deserve a company's best efforts. And in fact, if I'm giving you my money and that we've agreed a price, that's the deal. So I do deserve your best efforts because I'm giving you my money.
But this is the thing, and this touches on what Olly was saying as well about do people care? I mean, it's hard to care when you don't know that your experience isn't, that's what I find creepy about it. You go through life thinking all these things are just spontaneous stuff, like, oh, I had to wait a long time for my message to get an answer from the customer service department. You think all these things are just happening coincidentally and spontaneously, but they're not. They could be part of an experience that
Rebecca's
is actually being tailored to.
Rebecca's now pitching this as an episode of Black Mirror.
But this is why I think this is important news, that we are suddenly becoming aware of it, and we are aware of this new layer to all our transactions. And I think this could go on to be a big issue. If we get more information about it, we find out which companies are doing it, people can begin to fight back, for instance, on social media, rating companies publicly. And I think this will become a big issue.
And finally this week, it's Arion. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
So this week we discovered that aliens might have visited us, though it appears that they came in pieces.
This object is simply a piece of another solar system that was expelled, and it has been traveling through interstellar space for hundreds of millions of years, billions of years, we don't know. We don't see that in our solar system. None of the asteroids in our solar system look like that. So it's very puzzling how it could have obtained this shape.
That was Paul Chodas, whose business card says Manager of NASA's Near-Earth Object Studies. Amazing. Speaking to CNN. So something went floating through the atmosphere, Arion, and this is interesting to you. Tell us more.
It did. And in fact, the thing that floated through the Earth's atmosphere and through our solar system happened last October. But this week, 2 Harvard professors came out with the suggestion that this interstellar asteroid, which was about the size and shape of the Gherkin skyscraper in London, was in fact an alien spacecraft and that it was on a reconnaissance mission.
Well, yeah, when you say in fact, they did use the words, I've got the quote in front of me, maybe. They said it may be a fully operational probe sent intentionally to Earth's vicinity by an alien civilization.
That's a probably more fair characterization of what they said.
You are exemplifying the issue here, isn't it? I mean, they're just saying it may be. Science can't prove it isn't.
I mean, maybe is a bit soft when you follow it with the rest of that sentence.
They actually only used the word alien once in this whole report, to be fair, so just saying.
But they did use it, and I suppose using the A word is a big deal when you work for NASA.
I think that's the thing, and there's so many potential theories on what it is, but certain behaviours that the object exhibited made people scratch their heads and wonder what was going on. Particularly one thing that it did, which was that as it passed by the sun, it accelerated, which is out of all character with other objects of that type, or what astronomers would have expected them to do in that scenario.
But then it came from a different solar system, right? As far as I understand, this is, Rebecca, the only object ever spotted in our solar system that's come from another solar system. So that doesn't mean it's alien spacecraft. It might just mean it operates under different rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the issue is that we just don't really know. I mean, you know, we know a fractional amount about what's out there, especially once you go beyond, you know, our solar system. I'm not the right person though, because I cannot do with aliens whatsoever. Like the whole topic is just, it's just, I mean.
But to be clear, if Arion's right,
yes,
and this is Independence Day,
I will apologise to the aliens.
It is the story of the week.
Yeah.
It is definitely, if we're being monitored by an alien probe, that is the story of the week.
It's just a bit, the idea that like we don't know what this is, so maybe it's aliens, is just a bit, it's a bit medieval, isn't it? It's like we don't know what this thing is in the sky. Perhaps it's, you know, one of the things that we know about. You know, there's so much we don't know that I think it's just so. You know, it's not. It probably isn't aliens. It's one of the billions and billions of things in space that we don't know what they are. It's not this one thing that we've kind of invented.
And actually, specifically, these Harvard professors had worked with the thing they thought it might be an alien version of. What is it, a sail or something?
Yeah, it's called a light sail. So there's several ways that humans have theorized intergalactic travel could take place. One of them is a technology called a light sail, where you, I don't entirely understand it, but basically you're using the power of light, bouncing it off this thing that acts as a sail and propels your spaceship forward. What they think is that this could be a broken component of that, or what they suggested it could be is a broken component of one of those. But the plot thickens, as you say, Olly, because one of the 2 Harvard professors who is involved in this, Abraham Loeb, is involved in a project called Breakthrough Starshot that proposes to send an object rather like the cigar-shaped object that came into our solar system to Alpha Centauri on a mission, the next closest star to our solar system. So the fact that he has this bit of self-interest does make you want to scratch your head a little bit.
I do wonder as well whether they just put that alien word in there, Kari, so that when people made their way through this very long and detailed report, it proved that they were reading it.
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. There was actually a separate paper published this week suggesting that this cigar-shaped thing came from a binary star system, or a system with 2 stars, which was why it looked different. And they say that a functioning solar sail would have had a much smoother path and obvious radiation-driven acceleration, and would have been thinner. So basically, it just doesn't fit any of the criteria for how this would have looked. But as you say, it's a good way of getting publicity, and at least it does raise awareness of the issue. And I'm going to take on Rebecca now and say, I think clearly there is alien life out there, but we may not be able to recognise it because it's how to define life. We're by the Aristotle, more than 2,000 years ago, defined living beings as those that metabolise and sexually reproduce.
Is this you confessing to be a third rock from the sun style plant in the week office?
Possibly. But, you know, it's only in recent decades that we found out about DNA and that the predominant life form on Earth is a single cell organism. So we're still learning so much. So could we even recognise life if we found it?
And I think also the age of the universe and the size of the universe makes it more than likely most scientists agree that there is alien life out there, or there was, or there will be. So
But the thing about aliens when they're depicted in popular culture is that they do look a bit like humans. They've got brains and they breathe and they have spaceships.
Yeah,
and that's what Rebecca's talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not saying that there is no. I think it would be bold for me to sit here with my total lack of understanding of science and say, no, scientists are wrong, there is no extraterrestrial life. But when and if it does manifest itself to us, it's going to be in a form that probably will just blow my... It'll be like...
Okay, we're not on late night radio. I'm going to shut this avenue down. And I want to talk to you, Arion, about the conspiracy theorists out there who have run with this online. I mean, presumably, this is your story of the week because in certain communities, this is the story of the decade.
Yeah, and I almost think that's the problem with the story itself, that so much about aliens, when we encounter any stories about aliens, gets caught up in the sort of more lunatic fringe of conspiracy theorists and people who claim or believe that they've been singled out and stolen to some other galaxy and probed and then returned back to Earth. But that the fact that exists and that person exists doesn't make it any less likely that there are aliens out there. It is unlikely, of course, that in all our time of scanning the skies and not identifying any signals, suddenly a spaceship would turn up. That does seem a little bit unlikely. It seems much more probable to most researchers kind of think that it's more probable that you're going to see some sort of communication before we see a spaceship. But yeah, I think it's problematic that there are these conspiracy theorists undermining the true science of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, again, it comes down to our narrow definitions. We're so blinkered because obviously we can only judge by our own experience. So we expect a similar intelligence to ours. And obviously life and intelligence are two different things. Our whole view is we may be seeing life, but we just don't recognize it as such. But the Kepler spacecraft that was launched in 2009 and to search for planets around distant stars, and judging by the fact that more than 80% of stars have planets and about 25% of them are at a distance from the star that would allow for water, and obviously there's that old mantra, follow the water for signs of life, and then you add in the size of these planets and the estimated number of possibly habitual planets in our own galaxy alone is around 2 billion. So we've been on Mars. We know for 15 years there's been a continuous robotic presence on Mars. So we know that Mars could support life, that it may be supporting life because water flows there. But it's just a case of actually being able to identify it.
I think maybe we just need a new word. I think the word alien has just become kind of irretrievably tainted.
Alf. They nailed it in the 80s.
Yeah. Got it.
That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Rebecca Gillie, Arion McNicoll and Kari Wilkin, all of whom prove that intelligence and life can coexist. Never miss an episode of this show when you subscribe to the podcast. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice and hit subscribe. And wherever you find us, leave us a review as well. If only for alien life forms, we'll welcome anyone to the show. It does help other people discover what we're up to. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer was Chica Ayres at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, Nanu Nanu.